The collision of worlds, Julian Mercer drummed his fingers against the leather-wrapped steering wheel of his Koenigsegg Jesko, a rare Swedish hypercar worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. The rhythmic tapping matched his mounting irritation as he stared at the thin wisp of smoke curling from beneath the hood. 3 hours into what should have been a simple drive to his mountain retreat, the $3 million masterpiece of engineering had betrayed him, sputtering to a halt on a forgotten stretch of highway that snaked through dense woodland. "Unbelievable," he muttered, jabbing at his phone screen. No signal. Julian ran a hand through his precisely cut dark hair, a gesture that belied his carefully constructed image of perpetual control. As the 38-year-old founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, he had built an empire on anticipating problems before they materialized. Yet here he was, stranded like some ordinary traveler. Dusk was settling over the landscape when headlights appeared around the bend. Julian straightened his tailored jacket and stepped onto the road, waving down what turned out to be a rusted pickup truck that had seen at least 3 decades of hard use. The driver, a man who appeared to be in his early 30s with olive skin and eyes that crinkled at the corners, pulled over and rolled down his window. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight accent Julian couldn't quite place. "Evidently," Julian replied coldly. "I need a tow to the nearest luxury dealership." The man stepped out, wiping his hands on faded jeans. "I'm Farid Nazari. I run a garage about 5 miles back. No dealerships for another 100 miles, but I can take a look." Julian assessed the man with a dismissive glance. Worn boots, calloused hands, and a face weathered by outdoor work. "This isn't some Japanese commuter car. It's a limited edition Koenigsegg with a custom-built twin-turbo V8 engine." "I'm familiar with the Jesko," Farid replied, seemingly unperturbed by Julian's condescension. "Beautiful machine. 5-liter. Engine, 9-speed transmission, carbon fiber chassis." Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Knowing specifications doesn't qualify you to touch it." "Fair enough," Farid shrugged, turning back toward his truck. "Good luck with your phone signal." Julian glanced at his useless device, then at the darkening sky. Pride wrestled with practicality before the latter won. "Wait," he called. "You can look! Just look!" Farid nodded and approached the car with a reverence that surprised Julian. He didn't immediately open the hood, but instead circled the vehicle, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal, bending occasionally to examine the undercarriage. "What exactly are you doing?" Julian demanded. "Cars speak if you listen," Farid replied simply. "This one's telling me it's not the engine block or transmission. My guess is a failure in the electronic cooling system causing overheating." Julian's retort died on his lips as Farid finally opened the hood and pointed to exactly where the smoke had originated. "The control module here has shorted out. I can bypass it temporarily, enough to get you to my garage where I have the equipment to properly diagnose it." "And you determined this by listening to my car speak?" Julian's voice dripped with skepticism. Farid's eyes met his, neither challenging nor submissive. 20 years working with engines teaches you their language. Now, would you like me to help, or would you prefer to wait for someone with more impressive credentials? In the gathering darkness, Julian Mercer, a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, found himself facing an unexpected choice. Beneath the surface, the interior of Farid's garage defied Julian's low expectations. While the exterior was admittedly humble, corrugated metal walls and a faded sign reading Nazari Auto Repair, the workshop itself was meticulously organized. Specialized tools hung in perfect order on pegboards, and despite the concrete floor's age, it was spotlessly clean. "You can wait in that room." Farid gestured toward a small office as he guided the tow truck operator positioning the Koenigsegg. "There's coffee." Julian frowned at the threadbare couch, but reluctantly entered the office, unwilling to watch a stranger's hands on his prized possession. The walls were covered with framed certificates and technical diagrams, some yellowed with age, others more recent. One caught his eye, an award for innovation in automotive engineering from a respected international competition. "You won this?" Julian asked when Farid entered, carrying a diagnostic tablet. 3 years ago," Farid nodded. "Designed a more efficient cooling system for high-performance engines. Ironic, considering your car's issue." Julian studied him with new interest. "If you have that kind of talent, why are you working in a place like this?" Something flickered across Farid's face, not offense, but a quiet dignity. "Not everyone measures success by the same metrics, Mr. Mercer. You know who I am? Your face has been on enough magazine covers," Farid replied, turning his attention to the tablet. "Your cooling system failure is more complex than I initially thought. The main control unit is damaged, but it's also affected the secondary systems. I'll need about 6 hours." Julian checked his watch. Nearly 9 p.m. "That's unacceptable. I have meetings tomorrow." "Physics doesn't negotiate, even with billionaires," Farid said mildly. "But there's a decent inn half a mile down the road." Before Julian could respond, the office door opened, revealing an elderly man with the same expressive eyes as Farid, leaning on a cane. "Dada, you should be resting," Farid said, switching to what Julian recognized as Farsi. "I heard voices," the old man replied in accented English. "We have a guest." "This is Mr. Mercer. His car needs repairs. Mr. Mercer, my grandfather, Hamid." Julian nodded curtly, but Hamid's face brightened. "Please, join us for dinner. Nisha has made too much food as usual." "I couldn't possibly," Julian began. "It's no trouble," came a female voice from behind Hamid. A young woman in her mid-20s stood there, laptop tucked under one arm. "Dada exaggerates. I made a normal amount, but we'd be happy to share." "This is my sister, Nisha," Farid explained. "And we really don't mind." Julian was about to refuse when his stomach betrayed him with an audible growl. He hadn't eaten since a hurried breakfast. "Settled, then," Hamid said with a smile that crinkled his entire face. 30 minutes later, Julian found himself seated at a worn oak table in the apartment above the garage, a steaming plate of fragrant saffron rice and tender lamb stew before him. The simple meal was better than anything he'd eaten at the Michelin-starred restaurants he frequented. "So you fix fancy cars and she—" Julian gestured to Nisha, who was typing rapidly on her laptop between bites. "Fix is code," Farid supplied. "Nisha's a programmer, self-taught." "I do freelance work," she explained without looking up. "Debugging? Mostly. Companies hire me when their regular teams can't solve a problem." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Debugging what exactly?" "Today, a flaw in a neural network architecture for Vertex systems." She finally glanced up, noting his surprised expression. "You know them?" "They're one of our competitors," Julian said, slowly, reassessing the woman across from him. Vertex was a major player in AI development. As dinner progressed, Julian observed the Nazari family. Hamid telling stories of his youth in Iran before the revolution, Nisha and Farid debating the ethics of autonomous vehicles with surprising sophistication. Their modest living reflected none of the limitations he had assumed. Despite the apartment's small size and simple furnishings, books lined every available surface: engineering texts, classical literature, philosophy, mathematics. When Farid excused himself to continue working on the Koenigsegg, Julian found himself asking an unexpected question. "Why does someone with your skills stay in a place like this when you could work for any major manufacturer?" Farid paused at the doorway. "My grandfather needs specialized medical care. Nisha's building her portfolio. Some things matter more than prestige." He smiled slightly. "Besides, here I get to work on Koenigsegg's occasionally." As the door closed behind him, Julian stared into his tea, confronting the uncomfortable realization that he'd entirely misjudged not just Farid's abilities, but perhaps something more fundamental about value itself. A reluctant bridge. 3 weeks after the roadside incident, Julian sat in his corner office overlooking Seattle's skyline, absently tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a stack of reports. The memory of the Nazari family's small apartment and Farid's immaculate garage kept surfacing at unexpected moments. "Mr. Mercer?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The development team is assembled in conference room A." Julian strode through the gleaming hallways of Nexus Innovations headquarters, nodding curtly at employees who scrambled out of his path. The company's latest project, an AI-driven operating system named Prometheus, was 6 weeks behind schedule and hemorrhaging investment capital. "Give me solutions, not excuses," Julian announced as he entered the conference room. 8 exhausted developers and engineers stared back at him, dark circles under their eyes testament to the overnight sessions they'd been pulling. "We've isolated the problem to the core processing architecture," explained Olivia Winters, his lead engineer. The holographic display behind her showed cascading lines of code. "The quantum processing elements are experiencing cascade failures when handling multiple simultaneous operations." "Then fix it," Julian replied coldly. "Sir, we've brought in consultants from 3 universities. No one's seen this kind of integration." "Problem before." Olivia's voice remained professional, but the strain was evident. "We might need to redesign from the ground up." "Unacceptable." Julian's fist hit the table. "The Department of Defense contract requires a working prototype in 3 weeks. Redesigning would take months." The room fell silent. Careers and billions in funding hung in the balance. Julian dismissed the team with instructions to work through another weekend. Back in his office, he stared at the project schematics, frustration mounting. Prometheus was meant to be his legacy, an operating system that could seamlessly integrate with quantum computing architecture while maintaining compatibility with traditional systems. His eyes fell on a business card he'd absent-mindedly kept. AI's simple design with Nazari Auto Repair printed beside a phone number. Beneath it, handwritten, "Call if the cooling system gives you trouble again." An idea, completely irrational yet persistent, formed in his mind. Nisha had mentioned debugging complex systems for Vertex. Perhaps. Julian's finger hovered over his phone for several seconds before he made the call. "Mr. Mercer," Farid's voice registered surprise when he answered. "Is the Koenigsegg misbehaving again?" "No, it's running perfectly," Julian admitted. "I'm calling about something else. Your sister, you mentioned she solves complex programming problems?" There was a pause. "She does, but she's very selective about her projects. I'd like to speak with her about a consulting opportunity. Substantial compensation, of course." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll give her your message, but the decision is hers." 2 days later, Nisha Nazari walked into Nexus Innovations, looking distinctly out of place among the tailored suits, with her practical jeans and button-up shirt. Julian met her in the lobby himself, noting the curious glances from his employees. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading her toward the elevator. "I'm here because I'm curious," she replied. "Not because I've agreed to anything." In a secure development lab, Julian introduced her to Olivia and the core team, who regarded the newcomer with skeptical expressions. "Explain the architecture," Julian instructed Olivia, who hesitantly began outlining the Prometheus system. Nisha listened intently, occasionally asking questions that surprised the team with their precision. After 2 hours of technical discussion, she requested access to a terminal. "You want to see the actual code?" Olivia asked, exchanging glances with Julian. "I need to see how it breathes," Nisha said simply. "How it what?" Julian frowned. "Code has rhythm and flow, just like engines," she explained, echoing her brother's philosophy. "I need to see how yours moves to understand where it's catching." Julian nodded to Olivia, who reluctantly provided access to a segregated testing environment. For 3 hours, Nisha typed, scrolled, and occasionally made notes in a small leather-bound journal. The development team drifted away for other meetings, but Julian remained, watching her work with the same focused intensity he'd observed in Farid. "Your quantum integration protocol is elegant," she finally said, looking up. "But it's too elegant." Meaning, "You've created a beautiful theoretical model that assumes perfect conditions. Real-world quantum states are messier. Your system needs to embrace the chaos, not fight it." She pushed her journal toward him, where she'd sketched an alternative: architecture. "This approach would be more resilient." Julian studied the diagram, recognition dawning. "This is similar to how your brother approached my car's cooling system, creating pathways for failure rather than trying to prevent it entirely." A small smile touched Nisha's lips. "Farid and I often discuss our work. Different applications, same principles." Julian looked from the diagram to Nisha, weighing his options. Pride warred with pragmatism. "Would you consider consulting on this project?" he finally asked. "Your brother mentioned you're selective, but this could genuinely change how computing systems function." Nisha closed her laptop. "I have conditions. I work remotely, set my own hours, and I need assurance this technology won't be used primarily for military applications." Julian's eyebrows rose. Few people had ever dictated terms to him. "We'll need to discuss specifics," he replied carefully, "but I believe we can find common ground." As they shook hands, Julian couldn't help but feel he'd just crossed a bridge to territory entirely unfamiliar to him, one where he wasn't automatically in control. The unseen value. The transformation of Prometheus under Nisha's guidance was nothing short of remarkable. Within 2 weeks, the system's stability improved by 78%, and the previously insurmountable integration issues began yielding to her unconventional approach. What surprised Julian more than the technical progress, however, was how the atmosphere at Nexus Innovations shifted when Nisha was present. Though she worked remotely most days, she came to the Seattle office twice weekly for integration testing. On those days, the development team seemed different, more collaborative, less fearful. Even Olivia, initially the most skeptical of the outsiders' involvement, now engaged in animated technical debates with Nisha that often continued through lunch. "You've changed things around here," Julian observed one evening as they reviewed progress in his office. The rest of the team had departed hours ago, but Nisha remained, fine-tuning an algorithm. "The code is improving," she replied without looking up from her screen. "I wasn't talking about the code." This made her pause. "What were you talking about then?" Julian gestured toward the empty development floor beyond his glass walls. "The team. They work differently now, more openly." Nisha considered this. Perhaps they just needed permission to approach problems differently. Sometimes the most valuable perspective is the one that hasn't been shaped by institutional thinking. The comment struck Julian as a subtle critique of his leadership style, but he found himself unable to dismiss it. For 15 years, he had built Nexus around his singular vision, demanding rigid adherence to processes he'd designed. The results had been impressive, until they weren't. "Would you consider taking a more permanent role here?" he asked abruptly. "Director of Advanced Solutions. Full benefits, equity package, whatever salary you name." Nisha's expression softened into something resembling pity. "No, but thank you for the offer." "Is it the money? The title?" "Both are negotiable." "It's neither," she said, closing her laptop. "I value my freedom, my family, and the variety of challenges I encounter as an independent consultant. Those things aren't negotiable for me." Julian struggled to comprehend her refusal. In his experience, everyone had a price, a combination of money, power, and prestige that would sway them. "Your talents are being wasted debugging other people's mediocre code." Instead of offense, Nisha's face showed genuine curiosity. "Do you actually believe that?" That value is measured by the size of the organization or the profile of the work? Before he could formulate a response, his private line rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mercer, this is Hamid Nazari." The elderly man's voice sounded strained. "I apologize for disturbing you, but there's been an accident at the garage. Fareed has been injured." Julian felt Nisha tense beside him as she heard her grandfather's voice through the speaker. "How serious?" Julian asked, already reaching for his jacket. "The doctors say he will recover, but he required surgery. A hydraulic lift failed while he was working beneath it." "We're on our way," Julian said, surprising himself with the immediacy of his response. "Which hospital?" 30 minutes later, Julian's Koenigsegg pulled into the parking lot of a regional medical center 2 hours outside the city. He'd insisted on driving Nisha himself after seeing her shaken state. In the hospital waiting room, they found Hamid sitting alone, his weathered, hands clasped tightly around his cane. "He's out of surgery," the old man informed them. "The doctor says he was lucky. The lift caught his leg but missed major arteries." Nisha embraced her grandfather, while Julian stood awkwardly to the side, feeling like an intruder on their family. Concern. He was about to excuse himself when a doctor approached. "Family of Fareed Nazari?" "Yes," Nisha and Hamid answered in unison. "He's stable and resting. The surgery went well, but he'll need physical therapy and time off work. At least 6 to 8 weeks. Julian watched the concern deepen on their faces and understood immediately the implications. For a small business owner like Fareed, 2 months without income could be devastating. "Can we see him?" Nisha asked. Briefly. "Room 307. As Nisha and Hamid went to visit Fareed, Julian found himself pacing the sterile hallway. He'd come here. Out of... what? Obligation? Concern? Whatever the reason, he now felt compelled to help. When Nisha emerged from the room, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "How is he?" Julian asked. Typical Fareed, more worried about his customers' vehicles than himself. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He asked me to call the owners of the cars currently in his shop to explain the delay." Julian hesitated, then said, "I have a proposal. Nexus has an excellent medical insurance plan that covers consultants and their families. We could list Fareed as a mechanical engineering consultant while he recovers." Nisha studied him with an expression he couldn't read. "And what consulting would you expect from him while he's recovering from surgery?" "None," Julian admitted. "Consider it an advance for future work, and regarding his garage, I know people who could keep it running until he's back on his feet." "Why would you do this?" Her question held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. Julian found himself uncharacteristically lost for words. "Your brother did me a service when no one else would, and your work on Prometheus has been invaluable. It seems appropriate to return the favor." What he didn't say, couldn't articulate even to himself, was how spending time in the orbit of the Nazari family had begun to shift something fundamental in his understanding of worth. Their world operated on principles foreign to him, where value wasn't measured quarterly, where relationships weren't transactional, where work served life rather than consuming it. "I'll discuss it with Fareed," Nisha finally said. "But he's proud. Very proud." "So am I," Julian replied quietly. "Perhaps too much so." As they walked back toward Hamid, Julian realized with sudden clarity that the Prometheus project, which had once been his singular focus, now seemed secondary to the well-being of these people who had unexpectedly entered his life. Reforged connections. 6 months after Fareed's accident, Julian stood before the assembled shareholders of Nexus Innovations, delivering the quarterly report with uncharacteristic humility. "Prometheus has exceeded every projected benchmark," he concluded, gesturing to the holographic display showing the system's performance metrics. "Department of Defense implementation is underway. with additional civilian applications in healthcare and climate modeling beginning next quarter. This success represents not just technological innovation, but a fundamental shift in how we approach problem-solving at Nexus. Applause filled the auditorium as Julian stepped away from the podium. The stock price had doubled since Prometheus's successful launch, and acquisition offers were pouring in from tech giants worldwide. By any conventional metric, Julian Mercer had reached the pinnacle of success. Yet as the crowd dispersed and Julian retreated to his office, a strange emptiness persisted. He found himself staring at the view of Seattle's skyline without really seeing it. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Mercer, your 4 p.m. is here." "Send them in," he replied, straightening his tie. The door opened to reveal Fareed, walking with only a slight limp now, carrying a small wooden box. "Congratulations on the Prometheus launch," Fareed said, setting the box on Julian's desk. "Nisha says it's revolutionary. Your sister is being modest. Without her, it wouldn't exist." Julian gestured for Fareed to sit. "How's the garage?" "Busier than ever." Fareed smiled. "Your recommendation to the Exotic Car Collectors Club brought in more business than I can handle. I've hired 2 apprentices." Julian nodded, pleased. After Fareed's recovery, he had indeed connected the mechanic with several wealthy associates, praising his exceptional skills. It had been a simple gesture that cost Julian nothing but had transformed Fareed's business. "And what brings you here? Today?" Julian asked, eyeing the wooden box. "A gift. And an invitation." Fareed pushed the box toward him. Julian opened it to find a beautifully crafted model of his Koenigsegg, rendered in exquisite detail, mounted on a wooden base. A small plaque read, "The beginning of an unexpected journey." "Dada made it," Fareed explained. "He was a master woodcarver in Iran before everything. He wanted you to have it." Julian ran his fingers over the miniature car, touched by the gesture. "It's remarkable." "The invitation," Fareed continued, "is for dinner this Sunday. Nisha is celebrating completing her master's degree, and Dada insists you should be there." The words struck Julian with unexpected force. In the months since the accident, he had maintained a professional relationship with Nisha, who continued occasional consulting work on Prometheus. He had ensured Fareed received the best medical care and had helped promote his business. But he had carefully maintained a certain distance, unsure how to navigate a connection that wasn't based on transaction or obligation. "I have a board meeting in Tokyo on Monday," Julian said reflexively, then paused. "But I suppose I could reschedule the flight." That Sunday evening found Julian parking his now familiar Koenigsegg outside the Nazari home, not the apartment. Above the garage, but a modest house they had purchased on the outskirts of town. Lights glowed warmly from within, and the sound of laughter carried through the open windows. Julian hesitated at the door, an unfamiliar tension in his chest. He was accustomed to commanding boardrooms and navigating high-stakes negotiations, yet the prospect of a family dinner filled him with uncertainty. Before he could knock, the door swung open. "You're right on time," Hamid said warmly, ushering him inside. "Come, everyone is here." The living room was filled with people, Nisha chatting with several young women who appeared to be classmates, Fareed grilling on the back patio visible through sliding doors, and several neighbors helping to arrange food on a large table. "Julian!" Nisha spotted him and approached with a bright smile. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." "I said I would," he replied, awkwardly extending a gift bag. "Congratulations on your degree." As the evening progressed, Julian found himself drawn into conversations that had nothing to do with business or technology. He learned about the neighborhood's effort to establish a community garden, listened to one of Fareed's apprentices describe her journey from foster care to finding purpose in mechanical work, and watched Hamid teach children how to carve simple figures from wood. During a quiet moment on the patio, Fareed joined him. "You seem different," the mechanic observed. Julian considered this. "I suppose I am." Happier? More aware, Julian replied carefully, of what I've been missing. Before Farid could respond, Julian's phone rang, his CFO's number flashing on the screen. Ordinarily, he would have answered immediately, but instead he silenced it and put the phone away. Important call, Farid asked. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. Later, as guests began to depart and Julian prepared to leave, Nisha walked him to his car. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to Dada. To all of us." Julian looked back at the house, warm light spilling from its windows. Hamid, visible through the glass, instructing Farid's apprentices in some detail of woodworking. Farid himself washing dishes alongside neighbors, a tableau of connection that until recently would have seemed inconsequential to him. "I've been thinking about making some changes," Julian said suddenly. "Stepping back from day-to-day operations at Nexus, maybe focusing on a foundation to support technical education for underserved communities." Nisha studied him with those perceptive eyes. "That sounds meaningful. Why now?" Julian gestured toward the house. "This, what you have here. I've built an empire of technology and wealth, but nothing like this. Community isn't built overnight," she said gently, "but it's never too late to start." As Julian drove away, the miniature wooden Koenigsegg sat on his passenger seat, a reminder of the night his car had broken down and set him on an unexpected path. He had always believed that worth was measured in achievements, acquisitions, and influence. The Nazari family had shown him a different kind of value, one built on genuine connection, shared purpose, and the simple act of being present for others. Tomorrow, he would return to his company and begin planning its future direction. But tonight, for perhaps the first time, Julian Mercer drove not as a CEO or a billionaire, but simply as a man who had glimpsed a more authentic way of living and was determined to find his place within it. The engine of his Koenigsegg hummed perfectly, a daily reminder of the mechanic who had fixed not just his car, but something far more fundamental that had been broken inside himself for far longer.